Uh, is there any names of people you can think of? I'm thinking mostly of women, but men too. Mostly my list, I just realized, is all women. So I'll go with women who stood up to kind of rulers or the authorities and kind of changed history, or at least impacted history. Whose names come to mind when you think of women? Margaret Thatcher. Joan of Arc. I had that on my list. Laura Secord, Mother Teresa. Rosa Parks. I'm glad someone said that because I had a picture of it. Right? Harriet Tubman. Yep. Had her on my. Viola Desmond. Okay. Laura Secord. Changed chocolate forever. All right. Everybody know who this is? I never heard of this lady. Sophie Scholl. All right, she resisted the Nazis, and it turned. She was quite young, and she got killed for it. But it turned into the youth started to rise up, and she was the leader of kind of a youth movement against the Nazis in Germany. Malala, I don't know how to say that. Yousafzai, remember her? Right, she's the one who stood up against the Taliban and said, we should educate women. And they tried to assassinate her too. Emmeline Pankhurst, she was the one for the suffrage movement in the UK. Greta Thunberg, yep, she's had a big impact on history too. Sojourner Truth, anyways, just wrote down a couple names. There's lots out there. But these are all people whose names you know, right? You didn't know any of these people, but you know these names. And I just bring up these few names because women throughout history, right, have impacted history. They've changed history. And most of these women, they did so by standing up against kind of oppressive regimes, or standing up against evil, standing up against things that were wrong. If you think of slavery, it wasn't illegal in its day, right? But it was still wrong, and so they stood up against it. And lots of men did too, right? Gandhi and Socrates and Nelson Mandela and all sorts of different people. Even Galileo had to stand up against the church and say, no, we go around the sun. The sun doesn't go around us. Who knew you had to stand up for that? But he did. Right? So there's all sorts of people. All sorts of people. And this morning we're going to read a story. So you can turn to Exodus 1 if you want. Exodus 1. That's always an easy one to find because Exodus is the second book. And we're looking at two ladies whose names you might know, whose stories you might know. You may not have heard of this before, and so just here's some context for you. So we're going to be in the story of Egypt, right? And again, at the time, so Egypt, by the time of the Exodus takes place, Egypt's been around, and they've been a superpower for about 1,000 years already, over 1,000 years. The pyramids are already ancient history to them, right? They're almost 1,000 years old at this point. And so, they've been a superpower for a long time. And if you study history, there's like the first Egypt, and then there's a little break. Is that me? That's it. Okay, it's not just me hearing that. So sometimes I think it's the voices in my head echo sometimes, and so I'm just making sure we're all in this together. You're hearing the voices too, right? And so there's the first Egypt, and then there was a little bit of a break, about 500 years, where they kind of got destroyed for a bit, and then they came back for about another 1,000 years. And so Egypt was a massive superpower for most of the biblical history, kind of through history in general. They didn't move. They weren't one of those nations that spread like crazy, mostly because they were stuck around the Nile. That's where they got all their wealth and their power from. But they were pretty tough people to beat. And if you've ever read the Old Testament, Israel's always either joining with Egypt or joining with other people against Egypt. And they kind of play a huge part in the history of the Bible, for sure, but especially the people of Israel. And so starting in verse 11, right? And so they have settled, right? Remember Genesis, Joseph, his brothers, they're all there. Joseph brings his whole family. They give him some land. The Pharaoh gives them land. And they start to grow. They start to settle down. They start to grow. But then that Pharaoh dies, and we're a couple Pharaohs later. And so verse 11 says, so the Egyptians, right? Oh, actually, I'll go to the verse right before. They will fight against us, and then they will escape for our country. The Pharaoh's worried about what the Hebrews are going to do. He's worried they're going to turn on them. He's worried they're going to turn against them because they're starting to grow. So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves because they were fearful of them. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithon and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields, and they were ruthless in all their demands. So then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. These are the ladies we're going to look at this morning. When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders, and they allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this, he demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, the midwives replied. They were more vigorous, and they have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of the people, not just the midwives: throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. That's the whole story. Now, who's heard that story before? You remember this story? Right? And so again, this is just one of these moments in history, especially in Israel's history, where a superpower comes along and tries to oppress them. And this happens to be through these two midwives, right? Through these two women. Again, real quick, we don't know for sure, but there's assumptions that midwives are not married. These are women who could not have their own children. And so they become midwives because you walk, as a midwife, you walk whenever, who used them? Anybody used a midwife grown? Yeah, we tried. I kept calling them handmaidens. I got the name, yeah. I kept getting, I was like, we're one of the handmaidens, and Laura was like, the midwife? I'm like, oh, yeah, the midwife. Yeah, so if I say handmaiden at any point, you know what I mean, right? I mean midwife. Yeah, I used to get it mixed up a lot. Not to their face, hopefully not to their face. So what they assume is they're not married. They assume they're not married just because they have the ability then to walk with, or not married, they don't have their own children, because they have the ability to walk with these women all through their pregnancies and then with them. And so when the Pharaoh goes to them, because he wants the boys to be killed, he goes to the midwives and he says, hey, you guys got to work with me. We're gonna do this thing. Which, again, think about this. This is Pharaoh. This is Egypt. This is the superpower coming to you and saying you're going to do this thing, right? It's not a suggestion. Right? This is not a suggestion. And so in that moment of being asked, they, of course, now have this decision to make, right? One, I've got the superpower, clearly with the power to oppress us and take our lives. And so this is a rather risky situation for them. And so they've been given this opportunity. They've been given this direction, said, you've got to do this. And again, it's not like there's no carrot in front of them. It's just the stick behind them saying, go and do this thing. And so when he asked them, now they're faced with a choice, and as the Bible says, it says that they choose, they said, because they feared God. It says they feared God, right? They feared God, and because they feared God, they didn't do this thing. So what does it mean to fear God, right? Again, you can wear the fear of God if you want. I worked at polling stations. 2 people were wearing these. They're like hundreds of dollars. Anyways. No, you don't know this brand? Oh, not as cool as me, I guess, eh? Yeah. You never would have guessed I was cooler than you. Right? One of the essentials of life is the fear of God. But again, the fear of God is not like I am scared of God, like I walk around trembling in fear of God. Fear of God is it's acknowledging who God is, it's respecting God, it's being in awe of God. And because of that, because of knowing who God is and respecting Him, it's then I trust God, right? To have the fear of God, right? There's this knowledge of I know who God is, I understand who He is, and because of that, I will trust Him. Not why if you know, it's one thing to fear God, it's something else to be afraid of God. Those are 2 different things. And so when it says they feared God, they weren't like, well, I fear Pharaoh on this side and I fear God on this side. No, they're afraid of Pharaoh. They're not afraid of God, but they trust God. They acknowledge God. They know who He is. And so these are, Hebrew women. They know who God is. And again, this is one of the first people, really, first 2 people that we see to really trust God, to say, no, I'm going to put my faith. They don't use the word Yahweh, but I'm going to put my faith in God. And what they trust is, I have a plan given to me from Pharaoh. Here is his plan. Here is his divine plan. But I also understand who God is. And because I understand who God is, God also has a plan. And this choice that they make is, am I going to trust the Pharaoh's plan? Am I going to trust this plan? And of course, they do this plan. And so they don't kill the babies. And of course, Pharaoh, being the king, catches on pretty quick. Comes to them and says, hey, how come you're not killing the babies? How come they keep living? And I like how the Bible says it, and they replied. It could have just said they lied and said this. Right? And so they just lied. They go, oh, yeah, Hebrew women, they just have babies so quickly that we just can't get there in time. Right? So here's a question for you. Here's a question. Does God bless lying? Right? Because at the end of the story, God blesses them. They lie to the Pharaoh, and they say, oh, this is why we're not killing the babies. And you know, is there any, I can only bring this up because we were all told not to lie. But here we have people who lied, and they lied to save. Is there anybody in history, what examples come to mind of people who lied, and we're okay with them lying? Corrie ten Boom. Right? People who hid the Jews, right? People who hid the Jews. I don't think we're upset. I don't think God's upset and be like, well, yeah, you saved a life, but you did lie. I don't know. Anybody else? Hagar? Hagar? Did she lie?
I think she lied.
I'm going to have to check that. I'll bring it up when we do a sermon on her. Anybody else? Who do we got? Abraham. Abraham lied. We got him. Remember that movie, Schindler's List? Oscar Schindler? He lied like crazy, and he saved thousands of people. Right? Thousands of people. Right? Esther? I don't think she lied. She hid the truth. Yeah. Yeah. Frederick Douglass, right? He lied, saved a whole bunch of lives. Oh, there's all sorts of people we could go through, right? I just bring this up because it's fun to bring up, right? Here's a story where they go, we lied outright, and God's like, I'm going to bless you because of it. So when you talk to your children about lying, think about this story, right? But we're okay with that thing, right? And so it's just one of these weird stories. But why did they lie? And in this lying, of course, they're putting their lives at risk. They're putting their lives in danger. But again, they're trusting God. They say, Lord, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to disobey the superpower. That's in its own right. Now I'm going to lie to their face, right? Which has got to be something. But they're still, I'm going to trust. Imagine the amount of trust and faith in God to both disobey and then lie to the biggest superpower around. Right? They're not the only people to do it. But this is a pretty amazing story. These two basically unknown women. Did you know the names Shiphrah and Puah before this morning? Right? You probably knew the story. You've probably read it. But we don't remember their names. No one goes around with shirts with their names on it, right? Have courage like Shiphrah and Puah. That's weird, yeah. We'll be the first. We're gonna make this a thing. But this is their non-violent way. They didn't rise up. They didn't try and kill it. They didn't try and overthrow. They just lied. They went about their business, and they didn't do what he said. And again, the only way they could have done this is because they trusted God. If you didn't trust God, you're not going to do this because you're like, okay, I'm just going with Pharaoh. He's got a pretty good plan. But they don't. And I'm trying to think of the trust that they would need. And God blesses them for that. They trust him, and he says at the end, he says, listen, I'm going to bless you. You're going to have children, right? That's why we assume that the midwives, they don't have their own children. Because it says God blesses them with families of their own. Right? God gives them families of their own. But it's not just them. The point is not just if you resist evil, God will bless you. Because what happens because of them, right? So they don't kill all the Hebrew baby boys. And so what happens? Who gets to live? I mean, besides all the Hebrew baby boys. Well, the very next story, starting in chapter 2, it's the story of who, right? Now, at this point, right, they're not killing them, so the Pharaoh decides he's going to kill them. But they weren't killing baby boys, and so Pharaoh says, I've got to do it now. And who is saved because of this? It's Moses. So God blesses them, but also he takes, it's a small action. It's a big action, but it's not a huge story. It only gets a couple of verses. So God takes this moment, he takes this trust and this faithfulness to God, and he doesn't just bless them, he blesses all of it. All of history would be different if Moses hadn't been born. If they had said, you know what, Pharaoh, you're a pretty powerful person, I'm going to go for it, we're just going to do what you say. There goes Moses, there goes history. What would the Bible be without the story of Exodus and Moses and everything? It would not be the same. And so in this moment of trust, yes, God blesses them, but then God takes those actions, and he literally, like Moses leads to the salvation of Israel. But Moses only happens because of these two women. And so the actions of these two women leads to the salvation of Israel. This is huge. He uses, and of course, from Israel, right, comes Jesus and comes salvation for the world. So through the actions of these two women, we get Moses, we get the nation of Israel, we get the person of Jesus, we get salvation of the world. And I don't know if I've ever actually read that story and thought, it's because of these two women and their disobedience, their civil disobedience to Pharaoh that this happens, right? And it's amazing to think of a small action. Now again, if we think of anybody, a small action, someone who did something, it was pretty big, but it had a way bigger impact. I'm thinking Canadian. What do we got? I'll just give it to you. Oh, there it is. Your small actions. Here he is, right? Right? So this guy, Terry Fox, right? He loses his leg, he's got cancer, and he starts to run. And you remember what he originally wanted to raise his goal? Do you remember? Right? It was $1 for every Canadian. It There's roughly 24 million people back then. So he wanted to raise $24 million. So he does this thing. I mean, it was a big event. It became pretty epic. But it was just a small decision. I'm going to run across. I just want to raise some money. I want to help people in Canada. And what does he end up doing? How much has been raised worldwide since? Any idea? What's your guess? 50, but not quite. It's almost 900 million, right? Like, it's almost $900 million, and it's in 60 countries. And on the Terry Fox Run Day, it is the world's largest one-day fundraiser because it's always done on the same day all around the world, right? Think about a guy from Canada who started this thing, and now it's the world's largest one-day fundraiser. And not only did, and that's amazing in itself, but he advanced a ton of cancer research, he advanced the cause, but also for disability, right? This was a big shift in how people view disability. And so his decision, right? Again, small decision, I'm going to do this thing, I just want to raise some money, has turned into this worldwide event, which has shaped not just, fundraising, but shaped people's views of disability. It shaped the future of cancer research. And so this is just one guy here in Canada. I don't know if you've seen this commercial. It's really good. Anybody? No? You didn't see the new one? With the song by The Hip in the background? Oh, it's so good. Go home. We should watch. I should have brought it. Next time. Right? And that's a positive thing. Right? A small action can have huge implications. I don't have his picture here, but you ever heard of Elon Musk? Right? He did a small action, and it's basically tanked his company. Right? Small things that we do. Right? Small things, right? He did one speech, he did one thing, twice, he did it twice. But in those, right? But that thing that he did, if you know what I'm talking about, you should Google it, right? And like Europe has basically disavowed him, and his company is down 71%. Think about that. One small thing has a massive impact. Terry Fox in the positive, Elon Musk in the negative, right? We never know what impact our actions will have. And so like Shipra and Pua, as they make the decision, I'm going to trust God in this thing, they don't know. They don't know about Moses. They don't know that he's coming. They don't know what the exodus is Israel. They certainly don't know about the future that's going to come with the kings and then David and the promise to David and his household and eventually Jesus. They have no idea. They don't know any of that. God hasn't given. He just said, listen, you can trust me. They know God and they have the Pharaoh and they choose. So Jesus is alive because of these two women. Now Jesus goes on and he continues in the same vein, right? Like they disobeyed and Jesus comes along and what does he do? He ends up being the same type of person. He disobeys the religious rulers all the time. What does he do? Well, he heals people on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to do that. He flips tables in the temple. Well, you're not supposed to do that, right? He keeps touching the wrong people, right, and healing them. He keeps eating with the wrong people. He keeps doing everything wrong, and they keep reminding him and saying, you're not supposed to do that, right? It's not acceptable, it's not good, it's not right, it's not holy. You're not pure anymore. What kind of rabbi are you? What kind of teacher? Why do people follow you? You never do all of these things. And he just keeps breaking. Remember, he's eating the grains, and everyone's like, what is wrong with you? You're the worst religious person ever. Think about that, right? Think about saying that to Jesus. You are the worst you're the worst Jew, right? This is what they said to him. You're the worst. And eventually it leads to his own death. Because he will not follow their rules. He will not. I mean, he's a really good Jew. He still follows the scriptures. But in what he does, he sets off all of the religious leaders. He sets off the Pharisees. He sets off the Sadducees. Because he's disobedient to them. But who is he actually following? Why is he disobedient to them? They've been around for thousands of years. This is the law of Moses that they're following. And again, they're not bad people. They're just trying really hard to be really religious because they want to be as pure and holy as possible. Because they want God to come back, and Jesus comes along. And whose plan is he following, right? They keep saying, we have the law of Moses, and he's like, I'm following God himself. Like when Jesus comes, he's not doing this stuff because he's a rebel and he wants to be bad, right? That's not what he's trying to do. He comes because he's following the plan of God. And what is the plan of God? What is the heart of God? He says, actually, I'm here for these people. I'm here for the sick. I'm not here for the healthy. I'm here for the sick. And so I'm going to go to the sick. Well, you can't go to the sick. You can't eat with them. You can't hang out with them. No, this is exactly why I'm here. This is exactly why I'm here. Why is he flipping tables? Because it's fun. It probably was a little fun, right? Chasing people with whips, right? Remember that, what would Jesus do, right? Well, flipping tables and chasing people with whips is a definite possibility. But that's not why. Why did he do that? Because they were cutting off people from accessing God. They were cutting off the women's court and the Gentiles' court. The people that God wants to come to know him, they said, we don't care about you. We're going to set up a market in your area. And Jesus says, no, this is the heart of God. It's for the women. It's for the Gentiles. Do not cut off. So he flips the table and he chases them out. He's not trying to be a rebel. He's just putting his trust in the plan of God. And this is why he does what he does. Remember when he's in the desert? There's Jesus flipping tables, right? So when he comes, right? When he goes into the desert right after being baptized, and he's being tempted, and the devil says, "Here's this, here's this." These three options are all good options. Again, those are the options that everybody else thought about Messiah. These are the messianic ideas, right? You're going to be this type of person. And so when he gets offered this, he's being offered what the world thinks the Messiah is and what the Messiah is going to do. And he has the choice and say, I can follow that plan because that's what everybody wants anyways. Or I can follow the plan of God. And he says, no, I'm going to, thank you for the offer, but I'm going to follow God's plan. And then when he goes to the garden, he actually just says it outright. He says, this is not, in the garden or in the desert, he could have taken that choice. He could have gone down that road. And in the garden, he could have just avoided it all, right? That other option was gone, but he could have then, he could have called down angels. They would have picked him up. They would have protected him, could have done whatever he wanted. But what does he say, right? I'm not trusting my will. I'm trusting God's will. Now, these two women, they trusted God, and they changed history. Jesus had the same choice. Sometimes I think we think Jesus just came down and he's had to do it all. But Jesus also had to trust the plan of God. Jesus had to trust his plan. And the resurrection we celebrate because that is vindication that God's plan was the right plan. That's the whole point. And so Jesus is trusting the Father's plan. Even in the garden, he says, I do not want to do this. I don't know if he's like, this is a terrible plan. This is an awful plan. But this is your plan. And so I'm going to trust you. And so he goes. And he gives into this, right? And of course, the Old Testament is full about trust, right? Delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday, right? I don't know if these women knew the Psalms, but they embodied the Psalms. I will trust God. And through that, our righteousness, right, and justice will come. And think of all these babies. Think of Moses. Think of the people of Israel and their exodus and their salvation. All of this comes up. God allowed and brought this to happen because of their faithfulness, because of their trust. And again, through the Old Testament, all sorts of different times this happens, right? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, Mary, all sorts of different women who trusted God, and God used them. Right? God used them. To their own endangerment for these two women. Right? But Jesus as well. Jesus trusting God, and he knew it wasn't just a chance of death. He knew it was going to lead to his death. But he trusted that plan. And on Easter morning, the resurrection, this is the vindication. Because if Jesus had stayed dead, if there was no resurrection, then God's plan was not the right plan. Perhaps he should have gone with the world building, the army one. Maybe that would have been the plan. But in the resurrection, we have vindication. And so when you read this story and you see these two women who their faithfulness and trust in God led to the salvation of Israel. And then we see in Jesus, his trust and faithfulness to God's plan led to our salvation. All of our salvation. Because at any point, had Jesus said, I'm going to go with my own plan, I'm going to go with my own whatever, we have no salvation. We have no salvation. And so he trusts God. And of course, both of these stories, and again, this is one of these just short little stories, but I think next time you're reading through or talking to your kids about it, or it happens to come up in conversation, you're like, that's a weird little story. Right? It leaves us with an example, it leaves us with a question of are we going to trust? Because this is a story of trusting God. Right? And they're in a pretty bad place, and yet they still trust God. And for Jesus, it's always a story of trust. Everything that he did was following the Father's plan. Now, for us, we will probably not find ourselves in a situation where it's life and death, whether we trust God or not. Like physical death, like someone is going to come after us if we don't trust, I don't think we're going to be in those situations. Hopefully not. We live in a country where that's not really going to happen, most likely. But in a lot of other ways we do this, right? And every day we find ourselves, will we trust and choose to follow God? Will we do this? Right? And in a bunch of small ways. Right? Again, maybe at some point, I don't know, maybe our government will ask us to do something bad. Don't know. Right? And at that point, we will have a choice. And that may happen, and it happens to Christians all over the world all the time. But it's in the small ways in our everyday life where we still have to choose to trust and follow God. Instead of, and most of the time, sometimes it's following someone else, most of the time it's following ourselves. Here's my plan. Here's what God has called me to. What am I going to do? Right? What am I going to do? And oftentimes, even though it's not going to cost us our lives, choosing to follow God does cost us in other ways, right? It does cost us in other ways. Because a part of what we do is say, I'm going to choose to follow God, right? God says, all through the Old Testament, all through the New Testament, what does he call us to? He calls, all sorts of things, but overall, he calls us to what? To take care of the other, to love the other, especially the other who is in need. And so if we are called to love our neighbor, especially those who are in need, what is that going to cost us? It's going to cost us time. It's going to cost us money. It's going to cost us energy. It's going to cost us maybe putting some things we want to do, put them on the back burner. We're going to go help somebody else. That's all cost, right? That's all cost. And no, our lives are not in danger. But we're still choosing to follow God. Yeah. We live in a world where it's easy to show, anger and contempt. What does God call us? He says, I want you to be people who show compassion. You say that might not cost you anything, but sometimes, especially if you're a high school member, be in high school when your friends are doing this, and you're like, well, that's not right. You make a choice. What? You make a choice, and you trust God, even if it costs you some social credit, perhaps. Right? I don't know if any of you had to go through that. Hands up. Did anybody have to make a choice at some point where you trusted God, and it cost you something in high school? Maybe your reputation. Right? Probably. Maybe it wasn't massive. It was something small. Maybe it was something big. I don't know. Right? We had friends who run businesses, and they're Christians, and people came and said, hey, if you do this, we'll give you a bunch of business. And they said, I can't do that. That's shady. That's under the table. Right? As a Christian, I just can't do that. And it cost them a lot of business. Our one friend ended up losing his business because he was in the ski business, and they all said, you've got to do this for us, otherwise we're going to go somewhere else. And he says, you're going to have to go somewhere else. And they did. Right? Like that was a huge cost for him. But as a Christian, he said, I cannot go on the table. I can't deal without integrity. And it cost him literally his business. Jesus calls us to what? In a world where, especially when times are hard like it is right now, right? It's easy to just kind of hold on to our money and hold on to everything. But Jesus calls us over and over to what? To be generous. To be generous to those in need. And that costs us something. It costs us money. It costs us also the things that, I really want to do this or I want to go here, but actually this person's in need and maybe I'm going to share my wealth with them instead. I don't know if you think about that, but that's a cost. That's the cost physically of money, but it's also a cost of putting off the things that we really want. All sorts of things. I don't know. I don't know what it is in your life, but God, when God calls you to be a person of mercy and God calls you to be a person of compassion, God calls you to be a person who is generous, the world is not always for mercy and for compassion and for generosity. It's pretty easy to be people who follow our own plans, which is to be selfish and which is to point at myself and to put others down and to push others down to raise myself up. That's kind of the world we live in a lot of ways. Right? Even showing dignity to other people, right? There's all sorts of ways, right? But our hope is in God. Every day that we wake up, we wait for it because our hope is in Him. And it's only because of our hope that we are able to put our trust in God. And making even small decisions around how we use our money and how we use our time and how we use our energy, all of these things are based on trust in God, right? They're all based on trust in God. And so maybe we get to go protest. I don't know what protest this is, right? I think they're mad because they don't live in Cambridge and can't come to our church. I think that's what they're protesting. Yeah. But we live in a world where if you look around, there's a lot of things that we can do, right? Like there's multiple wars going on. There's multiple hard things going on around the world. There's a whole bunch of people, I'm not going to point to the States, but mostly in the States, where like they're making laws to oppress people. Right? And that's not here yet, but as Christians, part of our role, part of our life is to say, if someone's being oppressed, we need to stand up for those people. And if there's wars around the world, I'm probably not going to go to Ukraine, probably not going to fight Russia, but there's things that we can do here. What are ways in which we can support Ukraine? What are ways that we can not support Russia? What are ways that we can use our money in small ways, even if it costs us something? What are ways, people say, I'm not going to invest anymore. I don't know if you heard this week, right? Guelph University took all of their investments out of anything to do with war, right? Which is going to cost them money. That's pretty hard to do. But they did it, and they said it's worth it for us. Sometimes as Christians, we say, well, actually, what am I investing in? Am I making money? Am I profiting off the death of other people? Right? And maybe that'll cost us because maybe that stock is doing really well. But as Christians, this is part of I'm going to trust God in this. What am I going to do with this? Right? Whatever it is that we do, whatever way it is, every day we get to make these decisions to choose to trust God's plan over our own plan or whatever the world happens to offer to us, right? And again, maybe one day it'll be like on the massive scale. Hopefully not. We pray not. Right? We do pray not. But like this from Mother Teresa, right? Because sometimes it feels like I want to save the world. I would like to stop the war in Russia. Anybody? I'd like to stop that. Israel, Palestine, I'd like to stop that. Yemen, I'd like to stop that. Anybody? No. I think we all have these ideas like, I'm not doing enough. I'm just stuck here. How do I change the world, right? I want to do big things, which is why I always appreciate this. And this is on my email signature for a long time. And it just says this, right? It just says do small things, right? The longer phrase says, we cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. Right? And the reason we can do that is because we trust in God. Right? These two women trusted God. It led to the salvation of Israel. Jesus trusted God. It led to the salvation of the world. And what we do now is not going to lead to the salvation of the world. That God's already done that. But in what we do now, we can draw people to God. We can lift people up. We can have an impact. And here's the biggest thing is we don't know. I don't think, Shipra and Pua were like, listen, what we're doing now, it's going to be world-changing. It's going to be massive. They have no idea. They just go, this is who God is. I know who God is. I'm going to trust him. And we don't know what our impact will be, right? And there's things that people did 60 years ago which are starting to have impacts now, right? And whatnot. Henry David Thoreau, you know him, right? He just wrote an essay on civil disobedience, and that impacted both Gandhi and impacted Martin Luther King. He didn't know that. He didn't know what those two men were going to go on to do. He just wrote what he felt, what was right. And it went on to impact those two men, which went on to impact millions and millions and millions of people around the world. So we don't know what these small choices we make what the impact of this will be. We don't know, right? You're boycotting, you're pulling your investments, the way you choose your time, your energy, whatever it is. We don't know. But we do trust God in it, and we trust that God will use these things, as always, right, for his glory, for his plan in all of these ways. And maybe we'll be long dead before it ever comes around, that we get to notice that. But this is the verse that basically we live by every day, right? Everything that we do, every choice we make, we trust in the Lord with all our hearts. And we lean not on our own understanding. That'll get you far in some ways, but it'll never get us to where God wants us to be. But in all of our ways, right, we acknowledge him, and he will direct our path. But just like these two women, just like Jesus, and just like millions of Christians all through history, this is who we are, this is what we do. Just those small things of how do I trust God in this? What do we do? And the biggest part is to trust that God is using it. It may not feel like it. It might feel like small and insignificant, but it is not. For these two women, they had no idea what this was going to do. But God used it. And our hope and prayer is that as we make these choices, we choose to trust God and who he's called us to be in this world, that we will know and understand and believe and hope that these choices we are making, right? Again, whatever your life is, I don't know what these choices look like for you. I don't know what trusting God looks like for you in your life and your work and your family and all these things. But just know that as you're making these choices, as you're choosing to trust God, he is using these things in ways that you may not understand or know and may never. But that's how God works. This is what he does, and so we can trust that. And we're going to come to the time.